Thanks for having me down. If you've got any questions afterwards, I'm happy to take some questions afterwards. If anything doesn't make sense, then do write it down and ask me afterwards. I'm going to kind of whistle through some of it because I've got quite a lot of work to cover. I'm going to sort of talk about I guess, a series of projects that are basically interconnected through basically sort of my portfolio, but how they're sort of connected and how one have sort of built on another, and how kind of data and generative processes sort of thread through all of that. So, like I say, using data as a creative material. I have a little freelance partnership called Kultur Design, and we work on data visualization and information design, motion graphics, illustration and branding, and generative and data art. But at the moment, I'm working here at the GLA at City Hall, which is a great building to work in, and 3 floors up in the middle there is where I sit. Looking out over Tower Bridge, really, really nice place to work. And what I'm doing there at the moment is kind of information design and data viz. And it's more the chart end of data viz rather than the art end of data viz. So I'm doing stuff like this, looking at designing sort of presentations on the state of London, basically, you know, about looking at population and flows in and out of London, social issues like income inequality, that sort of thing, and the economy and business around London. And I work with the intelligence unit, basically, and lots of economists and demographers and those sort of people and GIS people all work there, and I'm the kind of the data viz end of the pipeline, if you like, in presenting a lot of this work. So it's that kind of stuff. And we also do kind of interactive applications, like this is a kind of a little rough prototype of a population explorer of like, you can pick a borough of London and see what the population is going to be in 2015 and what gender and ethnic makeup that is projected to be in at a certain time. And we also do, I sit with the GIS team, and we do a lot of mapping stuff like this, which is looking at green infrastructure in London. So this is measuring lots of different variables about road noise and cycling flow and air quality and different air quality particulates and things like that. So we're working on stuff like that. But that kind of sits down here in basically this. This is my visualization of visualizations. We're already deep. So basically what I'm going to do is sort of chart a bunch of projects across this chart. And the idea behind this is you, depending on what you want to do with the data and what the purpose of your visualization is, you treat it in different ways. So on the left-hand side, if you want the visualization to be insightful and impart knowledge, you generally want to be quite representative with the data. So you can see at the bottom is the more representative you want to be. And if you want to be, you know, kind of more expressive with the data, you can get away with more and abstract that data a bit more, and that's moving into the top right-hand corner there. Someone once asked me what sits in those other 2 corners, and I didn't have an answer for that, to be honest. So that's what we're going to do, sort of chart a course across there, so let's look at a few projects as we sort of move across there. This is a project for Dow Jones. It's sort of an R&D project, basically looking at the press activity between 2 companies, this Apple and Microsoft, and how that changed over years, and the companies between which they were in the press, who were they spoken about alongside. So and as that changed over time, basically it moved from kind of desktops to mobile discussions. This is a project for 51 Degrees with the Away 3D guys, and this is basically showing handset usage around the world for different manufacturers, and Apple surprisingly doing really well. And you can see it's sort of already starting. You can't really gauge exactly how many handsets are switched on at that time of day in that area, but it gives you a sense of the magnitude of Apple versus Samsung or Apple versus Lenovo. And that was a sort of WebGL application that we built. And this project was for King's College in London, and this is like one of the first data viz sort of projects and experiments I did. This is again looking at NO2 levels over London, and what was interesting is basically each of those points is the rise and fall of NO2 levels over London. But when you take all the scale away and all the reference away, what it also does is create these interesting sort of abstract shapes and abstract forms. So, and this is the first time I kind of sort of realised that if you can actually use data as an input into a kind of a drawing system and a sort of a graphic design system, and not just about sort of articulating a particular message. And yeah, I think that was when I first thought, it occurred to me that you could use data as a creative material, and draw things that you wouldn't otherwise draw, and let the data draw it, and use your system to let the data draw for you. So why would you want to do that? Well, your data kind of embodies, you know, whether it's your personal data or your business's data, it kind of embodies your efforts and relationships and successes and failures. And using that data in your graphic design or your visualization or your animation, it kind of embeds those features within there. It's like there's a sort of a serendipity to there was like I say, like on the King's one, there was a pollution event over Heathrow, and that gave that mesh, that sort of 3D form, a particular form that you wouldn't necessarily do yourself as a designer. So it's letting those features sort of leak through into the design. Sort of whizzing along, I'm sort of whizzing through this first bit because the meatier bit is up this. My end of things is more up in the right-hand corner here. So I was asked by, so this is a project called Space Oddity, and it was a project by Valentina De Filippo and Miriam Quick, and it won an Information is Beautiful award a couple of years ago. And basically what this is a visualization of David Bowie's Space Oddity song. And what you're looking at here is if you work around the clock face, every one of those points is a bar of the song. And in the center is basically the guitar line, the sort of acoustic guitar, which runs almost all the way through. Then you've got bass and drums, the next icon's out. Then you've got like mellotrons and stuff like that. And on the outside, there's some square icons, which is ground control. And then there's the circular icons, which is the Major Tom vocal lines. And you can see there are like little concentric rings around the squares and the circle, and that's the harmonies of those vocal lines as well. So that's where Miriam is a data researcher and a music PhD, and so she broke all this song down into all sorts of different ways, like lyrical structures and the rhythm sections. But this is kind of the instrumentation visualization. There was a whole bunch of these, and so we. There was this big exhibition at Wyden and Kennedy in London. It was a great night, and we produced an animation for that as well. And I'll show you a little bit now. So as we're progressing around here, these are the bars being introduced as we move around. And this is the same visualization, but instead of being sort of radial, it's working down a sort of a 3D sort of tunnel effectively. And the movement of each of the icons is driven by the audio of each track, each of the different channels of the track, because we had separate tracks for the audio. And then we did some sort of generative artwork of Bowie there to add in. So yeah, and you can see these kind of ripples working as the song, you know, as you work your way down the song, you get these nice ripples of audio working down through the visualization. So moving along, so Volanti Imaging is a small drone photography company, and they asked us to do their new branding and website. So I went along to the meeting and talked to them about what their brand could be, what they needed from their website, and we started talking about their logo. And this is the masterpiece I sketched on my notepad, and that's why I draw with computers. But basically, the idea behind this was that the logo was going to be this kind of, it's at the top, you know, kind of looking down on the logo is kind of these concentric kind of radar rings, but as you rotate that up, it forms a kind of a funnel shape, and they're kind of like these particles moving around in this sort of V shape. So they liked the idea, and so we went for it, and then started sort of developing what would that look like, and sort of iterating through those designs. what this leads to is basically some sort of plugging in some data into this identity at the end of the process. So we started iterating. So I use processing a lot to draw because doing this in Illustrator and just going, that's too many circles, let's draw it again. So processing is a really great tool for that. And trying different ways of drawing a circle. So you can draw a circle, a very intricate circle, or you can draw less intricate circles, and it's basic.
When you say processing,
yeah.
That's using algorithms to draw?
No, process. Well, yes, but also there's a bit of software called processing. If you go to processing.org, that's where you can download this software. It's like basically, yeah, process. I use it a lot, and processing. There's a JavaScript version, P5.js, and processing, which is like a desktop Java application, and it's kind of meant for sort of artists and designers, and you can output vector graphics, you can output stills, you can output video, all sorts of stuff, lots of inputs, lots of outputs, and it's great. So yeah, you're right, algorithmically working through it kind of all sort of parametrically, sort of say how many circles do I want, what should the spacing be, how many points around the circle should there be, and sort of playing around with those sort of parameters. So I started playing with the circles, and then started thinking, right, how do we move some spheres around those circles to make those kind of points move, and started playing with that. This was kind of a nice accidental animation which kind of does these nice little moments of symmetry as you're basically the dot on the outside is moving the most, and the dot on the inside is moving the least, and you get these little moments where it all kind of resolves and then comes together. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, cool. So we had circles and we had dots moving around, orbits. So then playing with weights of dots and length of tails and weights of tails. That's really ugly and awkward, doesn't really work. That's weird angle, as you say, am I looking at it this way or that way? And start iterating through lots of different versions of that, and views and counts. So quite nice, really like this, but not great as a logo because it's all too fine, but we kind of reuse this later. So sort of iterate through that logo and create a sort of a parameterized drawing system. No data in there yet, but so this is what we ended up producing. These are the kind of the little stings at the start, what they put on the start of their videos when they deliver videos to clients. And the logo kind of works depending on the sort of the resolution and the application between sort of 12 and 24 points. So this is kind of the more complex version of the logo. And yeah, smaller applications you could use like 12 points, just so it's a bit bolder, but ultimately works as the same way. And then this is how we use the kind of those multiple points as kind of secondary branding to add to the end of their videos. So managed to reuse those more complex scenes as well. So then output that logo for business cards, and because we'd written it sort of algorithmically, we could output a different composition on the back of every card, basically. And with digital printing, we create every card was a unique instance of that swirl, basically. And that's kind of white ink on grey card. It's a really nice digital printing trick of using white ink. Yeah. But what all that led to was in effect that because we'd sort of parameterized the way we built that logo, we rebuilt it in 3JS and put this on the front of their website. And what we could do is use the Open Weather Map API and actually hook into the current weather in London. And because their brand is all about flying and about air, and they can't fly in bad weather, basically you can use atmospheric pressure to kind of London right now to kind of increase the bars. Yeah, so sort of like isobars, and then wind speed. So it's like small data. There's two variables, but basically when you visit their website, you can kind of tell the weather in London, basically, and they're not flying on a day like this, I don't think, basically. But I think the way it works is the lower atmospheric pressure, you get faster wind speed, so you get faster but more. Less densely packed bars, I think, anyway. But that's how, because we built it in that way, we could easily sort of plug data into that. And it becomes a kind of an expression of their brand because it's linked to the current weather in London. Yeah, Tiger Beer. This was a project basically that Havas in Dublin got in touch with us about, and they actually wanted a a Facebook application which would take your picture effectively and turn that into we'd been doing kind of generative portrait stuff, turning your image or images into interesting kind of portraits, and I'll show you some of that later. And that's what they got in touch about. But then we realised, actually, there's all sorts of issues with Facebook. Your Facebook profile image, maybe it's got kids in it, maybe it's not appropriate. And given that the idea behind this application was that basically you generate some artwork, and the Tiger beer brand was all about expression and self-expression. They wanted people to generate this artwork, but if you've got kids in there, it's not really appropriate to generate some artwork to then go and get a beer with, basically. And what this application was is you generate some artwork and it gives you a voucher. Effectively, use that voucher to go and get a free beer. So what else could we use? So in the end we used simply used the names of we used the name of the user and the time of day and the season and the time of day and date of birth. That was it. But basically, we started with how do we turn their name into some sort of visual form? How do we do that? How do we map letters to visual form? So we obviously on the back of the Volanti project, straight off of that, I was still doing dots and lines, dots and circles. So this is what I thought. Okay, so A is 1 dot on a circle, B is 2 dots around the perimeter of a circle, C is 3 dots and onwards, and you'd plot your name from the middle outwards, basically, and that would encode your name into these points. So that gives us some points to work with, but what do we do with it? So I started playing around with, okay, maybe join the points up from the middle, maybe draw circles that have similar, that change opacity based on the value of the letters. Okay, fine. Multiply it up a bit because you weren't really getting a lot of density just with a name. So actually, you'd actually draw those points around a segment of the circle and just sort of repeat it round, so you're getting a bit more density. And then the art director created these icons, basically, to kind of that brought the kind of the Tiger branding to that configuration, and we added this kind of twist to it as well to give it more density. And so these were some of the sort of the test images. And do you know Peaky Blinders, the TV series? Yeah. So that's Thomas Shelby on the left, and that's his brother, whatever his brother was called. But what I found interesting in between when you see the test is that actually you can see the surname on the outside. There's a similarity to the outside ring on the two, but the middle is different. And these are their sisters, so there's a kind of family resemblance between those icons. So it becomes kind of like a family coat of arms. But what you also got with these cultural differences as well. So like Chinese names, for instance, would be like high letter values, Z's and X's and things like that, but maybe quite short and punctuated. So you get much bigger icons but sort of sparser, but maybe longer Eastern European names. They'd be very dense and longer. So you get these sort of cultural differences as you see them as a set. So yeah. Turned it into a Facebook app. Developers did that. And we did this in P5.js actually. So that's a version of developed it in processing desktop, which meant we could do print output, but also then redevelop the code for mobile. So that's the actual resolution of the print output that we did. So its processing is great for that. And so you can see all the details in there. And then it got used to brand the bar that they were sponsoring at the Dublin Fringe Festival. And all the performers there, we basically visualised their names of all the performers. And the bar staff got T-shirts, and there were tote bags, Data Viz tote bags. I've got loads of those. So that was a really nice project to see one algorithm being sort of pushed out to lots of different formats, lots of different mediums. So moving further into sort of abstraction and maybe being a bit more expressive with it, less direct. So pulse sensor, I'm kind of interested in finding data in sort of different places, and you start looking for data that's quite interesting and kind of textural and and quite dynamic, because letters in a name it doesn't change very often. It's quite a short data set, but pulse data, for instance, it's a constant flowing source of data, and it's very very textural. So went to Maplins, got one of these things, started experimenting with it, and this is basically a pulse sensor that reads the inflow and outflow of blood in your skin, basically. So you put that on your finger, and that's what it's doing. It's measuring with light, reading the blood as it flows in and out. And this is the kind of the raw output you get from that the sketch. And there's kind of two things. As I said, the uninteresting data is the 87 BPMs, because it kind of goes to 86, and then it goes to 85, and then it goes to 87. It's kind of not that good. But the waveform's way more interesting as a kind of as an input to a visual system. So that's what we started playing with. This was an experiment of basically taking that waveform and wrapping it around a sphere. So basically, the higher the value in that waveform, the more it gets pushed off and displaced from that sphere. So all of those, and also coloured, it goes more red as it's being, and scaled. Each of those points gets scaled more as it's being pushed away from the centre from that core sphere mesh. Then we kind of did an event for an agency, doing a sort of talk like this. But then afterwards, we got everyone in the agency to come up and hook themselves up to this device, and we captured everyone's waveform at that moment. Some people danced around, some people didn't, and created these kind of individual sort of art posters for each of the sort of the attendees at that event. So they're all visually quite similar, but unique to that person. No one else was going to have that unique signature at that moment in time. And that's what I like about that sort of saying about using data in your work, is that serendipitous moment of putting and binding you to that form, which in turn led to like a proper job, which some speculate. You've got to speculate, but this was a job with for Papworth Hospital in Cambridge. They're building have now built a big new heart and lung hospital in Cambridge. And Stephanie Pozavec, some people might know her Dear Data book, great artist and graphic designer to work with. And she came to me, I think maybe having seen some of those experiments, we sort of knew each other anyway, to explore how could we create artwork for this hospital. So what the brief was to create dozens of unique data-driven artworks to decorate and obscure the glass frontage of individual patient rooms. So every floor has these kind of glass partitions in front of these wards. It's all quite critical care, so the nurses need to keep an eye on all the patients all the time, so they're not kind of semi-private rooms. But you need people to not walk into the glass, so there's that sort of practical thing. But also you kind of need some privacy, semi-privacy basically, and all the way marking as well, so you know what floor you're on and what patient room you're looking at basically. So that was Stephanie's job, to kind of to research the data and say, how can we take this data and turn that into kind of these visual encodings. So we worked together and bounced ideas off each other as we were developing the software and developing and refining the data and the visual sort of concepts. So this is pulse data. So we actually did a kind of a field trip up to Papworth and sat with in the outpatients department and captured loads of people's actual data on the day, and staff and patients. And obviously in the heart outpatients department, you get all sorts of interesting data, because honestly you wouldn't believe some people have the fastest, most militant heartbeat you can imagine, and some are all over the place because they're in a heart clinic, which was great for us. So we developed some software, but what's nice is that it binds these patients and staff to this output, to this visual output. So we built this software so Stephanie could sort of take that data and kind of curate the nice bits of that, the interesting bits of that data, and sort of loop it and kind of sort of modulate it to kind of get nice outputs. Of course, we were very limited on what we could print, so we were working always just in black and white basically, or basically just white. And so that's pulse data. Blood flow data we used, basically again more clinical data. And the variables in that data, this is quite small data, but what we did was set off particles moving across the screen from various wider or narrower kind of emitters on the side. And you can see that's quite ragged and irregular, and some of them are much more free-flowing because they're moving faster across the screen. They're all based on the data in that patient's record. And then spiratory data, which is kind of lung data, is sort of inflow and outflow and the health of their lungs, basically. And what we did was produce these trees, these branching trees, sort of based on the structure of the lungs as well. For basically, there were three trees on each window. One was when the patient arrived at Papworth, one was after 6 weeks, and one was their six-month kind of checkup. And hopefully, you see sort of an improvement of their condition over those designs. Sometimes not. And this is what they ended up being. So huge, dozens and dozens of these things printed, big, very large scale on these patient rooms. So, like I say, semi-obscured, some access for the nurses to see in. But nice to see that sort of generative system. Really, you couldn't do that manually. You couldn't do that output of consistent artwork and as a manual process. It's built for designed for that sort of parametric approach, a data-driven approach. Reasons to be Creative conference just down the road in Brighton, which sadly has now ended. There is no more reasons to be creative. I'll just go. So I don't know what John and I are going to do in September anymore, because that's the only time I'd ever see John. So we're going to have to find some new fun in September. So, but basically, a long way round, we were asked to do the 2016 conference titles for the Reasons conference. And this was their logo. What it started with was John, the organiser, asked lots of people who were talking there and had previously spoken there to kind of redesign sort of remix the logo basically for the event as a kind of a celebration of the 10 years of the conference going on. So he asked us to do that too. And so we thought, how can we do what we do and put data into this, make this sort of somehow alive? So we took the logo and split it into points. So again, that gives you something to work with. It gives you something and sort of what number of points work, what number of points don't. And you take those points and then you this is just sort of random data, but sort of put some values into those points. And basically what those are doing are moving off the Z-axis towards you out the screen based on the value of that point. That's fine. So then put some more fluid data, and this is kind of random noise data. So noise is kind of naturalistic random data. So much more fluid. Now this is the point where it started getting interesting to me, because you get these interesting kind of distortions of the logo. It's like starting to do something visually interesting. But that was just sort of random noise, so it's not really data. So this is my friend Joe, and Polly's friend Joe, and he's in a band with Am and Tobin called Two Fingers. And he looks really grumpy there, but he's really friendly, really nice guy. But they were both based in Brighton, and Joe still was at the time. So what better reason to get Joe, Brighton-based band, to write us some music. And then we could use music and pipe the audio data into that system. So that's what we did. Sort of overdrew the lines a bit, made the design a little bit more, a bit punchier, a bit brighter, a bit more finessed. And so what we could do is we could create sort of infinite variations of the logo, and that was our kind of remix. You kind of limited what the brief was. You're kind of limited to this little square on the website. You've got to create your remix in that. So data-driven remix basically of the logo. So which led John to give us a call and say about 6 weeks before the actual conference to say, can you do us the opening titles? And I said no, because there's only 6 weeks, and Joshua Davis is talking, and Mario Klingerman is talking, and Jared Tarbell is talking. These are all my heroes, and it's a bit of too much pressure. But having then put the phone down and then phoned it back and said, yes, all right, we'll do it. Obviously, but like that was just, so big opportunity. Basically what I'm going to show you are some of that opening titles, and everything you're seeing in it is basically driven by the data. So the shape of the logos is basically is in there, but it's 3D this time, and you're actually sort of immersed inside that shape. All the colouring is driven by the data. The shake of the camera and the movement of the camera is also driven by the data. So that's and obviously the music is the music that's driving it. So as we kind of exit our chart and kind of move into sort of uncharted territory of kind of more sort of data come generative art, maybe it's using data to kind of seed some sort of generative processes, or so it sort of moves away from, I guess, data visualization strictly and moving more into the generative area. One place if you look at basically a digital image, it's data. It's an array of color values, of RGB and alpha values. And I was kind of interested in looking at how could we look at the data in an image, how could we manipulate image data and draw things from it. A project I did a long time ago, this project called Dead Presidents, and I created a drawing tool to kind of recreate these famous presidential portraits, but kind of algorithmically. Use processing so we could output these nice sort of high resolution prints, sort of art prints, which came out really, really nicely. But the way it worked, I'll sort of flick back, the way it worked is, I say it's an algorithmic tool. What it really was kind of an algorithmic drawing tool. As I moved my mouse around, basically it was every now and again picking up the colour as I moved my mouse around, was using the average colour from my last couple of mouse positions to cut and then draw a triangle from my last 3 mouse positions, and so using average colour and drawing a triangle from where I was moving to create this composition. So semi-algorithmic, but also kind of a drawing tool. And I was never entirely happy that it was kind of algorithmic, and I kind of wanted to recreate that process but make it truly kind of algorithmic. And I came across this image of Square Pusher, Tom Jenkins, I think is his real name. And so I thought, great, I'm going to try and recreate that approach, but autonomously, if you like. So, like I say, the way you build up those pictures is kind of like a painter. You kind of do big triangles at the back, big swathes of colour at the back, block it in, and then start working inwards into the features and into the eyes and the little finer features. So how am I going to do that sort of algorithmically? Well, first thing I did was took that image and used OpenCV, and it's got a feature called Find Edges. And it kind of looks like it's inverted it, but what it's actually doing is showing you where there's contrast between pixels. So when you get a sort of a step change in colour, it will, like the edge of his head, you get a really dark line there, or in his eyes, you can see there's a bright spot in his eyes. It's showing, okay, things changed a lot here. Sort of various features. So what that's telling you, if you're using kind of contrast as a kind of a proxy for interest, it kind of says, okay, that maybe there's a way of finding where there's something interesting in this image. So if you downsample that image, it's like gives you a matrix of interest, if you like, at a low resolution, and then slightly higher resolution and slightly higher still. So if you think about that as a kind of a drawing guide and use that as a data set, that's what I did. So that kind of lowest resolution, I said, well, draw the 80% most interesting. Don't draw everything, only draw where there's 80% most interesting areas of that grid. The next level up, maybe 60% most interesting, next level 40% most interesting, and then for the fine details, the 20% most interesting. And if you comp all that together, you get this kind of multi-layered sort of pointer list kind of portrait. fine, doesn't look very dead presidents, but if you, instead of drawing circles, you draw triangles located on those grid positions, bigger if it's on the bigger grid, smaller if it's further toward the front, you're getting something like that composition. It's kind of selectively picked out various parts of that image, and it creates something interesting. The magic of drawing things algorithmically is that, of course, you can just change the style. That's the same image, but instead, or in fact, virtually the same image, but instead of drawing triangles, filled triangles, I'm just using the colour to draw the outlines of the triangles. And so you start to get this sort of, I sort of went, right, dead president's fine, but now this is more interesting, went down this route. So yeah, started drawing this kind of bird's nest kind of approach to the portrait, which is quite interesting. Put some dots on the ends of those triangles instead. They're a bit big. Put some smaller dots, and then I was like, data viz. This looks like a network diagram. And yeah, so these were the sort of portraits I was kind of happy with. But like I say, this is the one I really liked. And then you can animate those points and kind of make them move around a bit. And like, there's some sort of kind of agency there. There's some sort of meaning behind this data, but it's a portrait. But it's like they're sort of knitting it or working on it. So that was kind of the seed of like, okay, what could we do with this more elaborately? So you take that same idea, expand that world, instead of it being a flat 2D kind of drawing, into 3D, and yeah, created a motion piece with Square Pusher's music here. I like this sort of idea of sort of corruption, and just you sort of hinting at where a portrait just about comes into. There's something in there that I recognise, but just breaking it apart and corrupting that image a little bit, just sort of, and abstracting it. And that black planet that moves across there is my favourite bit as well, which was a complete accident, but it just gave this real depth to the animation. But yeah, so again, serendipity. Yeah, so kind of moving on, I like the oil tone, the oil colours and things in those kind of dead presidents portraits. But I like the process of what I was doing with the Square Pusher thing. So I thought, can we sort of do the same again? But this time with sort of Dutch still lifes. Again, vivid colours, beautiful colours, rich colours. How can we use that as a base for our sampling, if you like? So this is actually not a Dutch master, it's actually a photo taken by Richard Osterland. And those are plastic flowers, a little plastic snake that he got from the local toy shop, I think. But yeah, genius photographer, really good. And he gave us permission, and this eventually turned into an installation in a Chinese hotel. But he gave us permission to work with this image. And which again started from an experiment, and the client saw the experiment, and it turned into this installation. But so what did we do with this that was similar to Square Pusher? Well, triangles basically, same algorithm, but instead of we're drawing in little circles, so you get these sort of twirly shapes. What we're also doing is pushing the darker colours towards the back and the brighter colours towards the front of the mesh, but just separating them out a little bit and creating this kind of 3D form. There's a trick in lots of graphics tools, but if you basically, instead of clearing the screen every time you move something, you don't clear the screen, you kind of overpaint basically what was previously there. And then you're kind of using those oil colours and the structure you draw out of that image as a brush, effectively. So using Richard's amazing colours and his image as a kind of starting point as a brush. And this is I'll do a short bit of this because you'll all fall asleep. But this is what we produced, something similar for a China. So yeah, it goes on. But so yeah, but it's I don't know how to make that. I don't know how to paint that. But you know, it's like, you know, how do you do those colours? I don't know. But serendipity, love it. Again, square pusher related. He's obviously my muse. So I was interested in, well, this project came out of Brexit actually, which is my other muse. What this was about is kind of, I was thinking of, well, basically Square Pusher released a record called MIDI Sans Frontières, so music kind of MIDI beyond borders, or without borders, and open source this track for people to remix around the world. And in light of, and it was at the time when the Brexit vote had just gone through, and as a way of kind of keeping Europe together, or keeping, you know, creative union together. And it made me think, maybe I could do a visual interpretation of this tune. What would that be? And it started making me think about, okay, so we live in this kind of, this, you know, the EU is kind of an administrative construct, right? That we live within, if we're going to pull that apart, how long do those relationships, you know, still maintain? You know, they don't instantly overnight disappear. How long do our trade relationships, you know, continue? But also I have other relationships, family, people on Twitter that live in Europe. Half of my Twitter feed is in Europe. So other kind of networks are going to survive and cross-pollinate and collide. So it's not obviously like suddenly you don't talk to Europe anymore. So, so instead of using the literal sense of these structures, these administrative structures or social structures, it's like, what other structures could I use as a proxy or a metaphor for those structures? So I started thinking about spheres and concentric circles and globes and mathematical structures as a proxy for those structures, and how do those points, how do those individuals in those structures interrelate and interconnect and come apart and rejoin as they move around. And that's what this is about, using Square Push's MIDI Sans Frontières. So. It goes on. Thank you. So, which in turn led on to, well, basically there were two jobs or two things I'd been working on, which led on to this kind of final project I'm going to show you, which is the Information is Beautiful Awards. Which basically is kind of the date of his Oscars, and quite niche, but nonetheless, nonetheless the date of his Oscars. David McCandless, who runs that, and he's written a book, Information is Beautiful, the kind of tabletop, sort of coffee table book that a lot of people might have seen. Anyway, he runs these awards every year. lots of people in the industry enter. And so he talked to me about could I explore sort of the rebranding and some of the motion graphics that they wanted to use at the ceremony, which was in New York at the end of last year. I didn't say no to this one. And so we kind of got busy kind of iterating, but it was kind of based on, basically I'd been doing this stuff on Instagram. Basically and I'm still doing this stuff, looking at taking an image and basically dividing it up into a grid and looking at the pixel value in that image, and the brighter it is, the more I bring it forward in the composition, and the darker it is, the more I push it back. It's kind of a well-trod path in kind of computer graphics and generative art, but then combining things, I just wanted to get more three-dimensionality into the work and more of a structure in there. And so that was that's a picture of an electron, some pollen under an electron microscope, and that's a picture of Roots Maneuver, and that's what's his name? Henkel something. It eludes me. Kind of an illustrator from the 1800s, I think, drew these nice sort of kind of scientific botanical drawings, and it's basically picking out the features from that drawing. And that's the one he actually saw on Instagram and sent it to me and said, "Oh, could you do something like this for our award ceremony, our branding?" Combined with what I was doing with the proximity studies, this kind of all fitted together quite nicely. So I wanted to, obviously it's the Information is Beautiful Awards, it's all about data, so how are we going to use data in this? So we got started on looking at basically using the entry data from all the previous 10 years of awards. And what's going on here is every point there is an entry into the awards. And this is basically 1 year, it's sort of rotating around. And basically each one of those kind of little segments is a category in the awards, science, news and journalism, arts and humanities, those kind of things. And where there's a kind of a ring round those circles, those points, that's the winner of that category. So you can see there's one winner in each category. So that was a start of kind of investigating what that might look like, and then doing the proximity thing and saying, okay, as these kind of entries kind of cross-pollinate and come close to each other, what interesting forms do we generate there? And then if you stack the years up on top of each other, this is the kind of forms you start getting. So it's like, okay, it's quite interesting, but actually using the real data from the real entries kind of wasn't dense enough, it just wasn't doing enough kind of visually. So actually we kind of sort of jettisoned the data at that point, but kind of used sort of an amplified version of that data. It's like we used similar kind of numbers of categories, the entries you'd get in certain categories, and similar kind of numbers, but actually it's like pseudo data. But it's the structure and the concept behind it, and the graphical shapes are based on that entry data. So the data is still sort of seeded in there somewhere, and it's why it is what it is. So this is it, kind of more densely packed, and with some sort of post-production on it. And what it is as this rotates and moves, and as those inner circles and outer circles move and rotate around each other, they find connections with each other, which is very much a metaphor for how the data viz community works. Everyone's feeding off each other, cross-pollinating between categories. So here, there's some of the forms from the new kind of logo. And then we use that sort of that 3D grid system to start looking at. He wanted an animation for each category, basically. There's like 14 categories in the awards. So we had to kind of think up. So this is like music and culture, I think, science, looking at all sorts of different ways and of generating these images from images, popular culture. Again, sort of proximity studies using sort of concentric spheres. Geography, I think, or news, I think that was. That's that Ernst Haeckel, that was it. That's that image again, but turned into points and connections. Foreign language data viz. Best studio, best individual, so that's picking out the individual winner in that logo. Rising star, visitors votes over the public votes, that's kind of an X. Humanities, Yeah, so that was kind of the images we came up with, and what we did was transform between the logo for each category and that composition, and I'll show you a quick bit here. This is all projected in, had sort of, you know, typography over it, and projected in this massive church in New York, which was quite an atmospheric place to have all this going on. And this was sat spinning in the background throughout the whole sort of awards ceremony, this kind of evolving, changing sort of logo, but visualisation as well. So yeah, sort of where am I now? What am I doing? So what's next? Well, if you're interested in P5JS, Net Magazine this month, I believe, has got a tutorial coming out about that I wrote on data-driven animation. And so if you're interested in making something like this, basically kind of an audio visualizer in P5JS, then I think that's going to be in this month, sort of mid this month. And again, this is two fingers music, which works really well as a test subject. So, and yeah, some little side projects, because I'm kind of working at City Hall most of the time now. I kind of have some spare time. I like doing stuff away from the screen, and I like doing stuff on the train. So generative dice is a little thing that me and my friend Frederick, also have reasons to kind of fame. Yeah, we've kind of come up with this thing. Frederick's computer broke down basically, and he didn't have a computer to work on the train. And I'd been doing these kind of like little sketches with data, trying to work out ways of playing with data and playing with randomly generated data, and get down to really much more interesting algorithms rather than chucking loads of lines at it. Think about interesting ways of handling data. And so these are kind of experiments I've been doing with dice, kind of connected networks, little spirals or radial plots, displacing squares. This is lots of displaced squares drawn over each other, interweaving graphs. But the position and direction of all of these lines is sort of dictated to by various dice and coin flips. I know it's a bit nerdy, but what gets you, it kind of gets you into working, like really thinking hard about the algorithm, really thinking hard about the form, because you haven't got time, you can't draw this load, so you got to think hard about it. Yeah, so we've been doing this sort of stuff with Frederick. So yeah, look up generative dice hashtag on Twitter and Instagram. And creative commuting is me and Frederick's other thing. Basically, is what we do on the train now. He's got a computer back. And I'm doing more of this depth stuff, basically trying to derive depth and form from images, from flat two-dimensional images. And this is a bust in the Met Museum. It's like a Roman guy, but basically taking that image and trying to derive depth from it, and then abstracting it and turning it into a 3D mesh, and distorting and playing with that mesh and seeing what shapes and forms and textures I can make from that. So that's some, and that's Bath Cathedral roof, I think. Had some leaves in my garden, all the colours the autumn leaves. That's some sandstone in my local outcrop. That's a skull. So playing with these, I've sort of created this sort of design system and illustration system, and sort of I'm playing with that on the train at the moment, and using it sort of for typographic experiments as well, and sort of motion experiments like this. So that's an F, but you kind of draw the depth out of that, blur it, draw the depth out of it, add some noise, and start moving it around like that. So that's kind of what I'm working on at the moment. So and that's it. Thank you very much.